The message was only 12 words long, but it erased 20 years of pretending I still belonged. Ethan Walker stared at the glowing screen of his phone, unable to move as the words from his younger brother Ryan sat there like a door being quietly closed in his face. Don't bring your family on Father's Day. We're sick of you. For a moment, the noise of the Saturday afternoon disappeared. The sound of his daughter laughing in the back seat, the soft music playing through the speakers, even the steady hum of traffic outside his window, all faded into the background. Ethan looked at the passenger seat beside him, where he had placed the homemade card his children made for their grandfather. It had taken them 2 hours. His youngest daughter had carefully drawn the whole family together under a bright blue sky. She had written, "Grandpa, we love making memories with you." Ethan swallowed hard and locked the phone screen. He didn't want his children to see the disappointment on his face. "Dad?" his daughter Lily asked from the back seat. "Are we almost there?" Grandpa said he wanted to see my drawing. Ethan forced a smile, the kind of smile he had practiced for years. "Almost there, sweetheart." But the truth was, he wasn't sure if he should keep driving. For most people, a family celebration was just a day on the calendar. For Ethan, it was another chance to prove that he still mattered. He had spent years believing that if he worked harder, helped more, and stayed patient enough, his family would eventually see him differently. He was the oldest Walker child, the responsible one, the one who stayed when things became difficult. 20 years earlier, when their father Daniel was struggling after a serious illness, Ethan was the one who put his own dreams aside. He postponed college, took extra shifts, and helped keep the family home from falling apart. Ryan was still young back then, full of ambition and big plans. Ethan never blamed him for leaving to chase opportunities. He only wished Ryan remembered who helped him get there. Over time, everything changed. Ryan became the successful son everyone admired. He wore expensive suits, attended exclusive events, and appeared in local business magazines. Ethan became the quiet brother people described with a polite smile and a simple sentence. "He's doing okay." They never knew about the nights he spent working after everyone else went to sleep. They never knew about the sacrifices he made without asking for recognition. They only saw the surface. And today, on Father's Day, Ryan had made sure Ethan understood exactly where he stood. Ethan finally turned the car into his father's neighborhood. The familiar streets brought back memories of childhood summers, family dinners, and moments when he still believed nothing could separate them. He parked outside the house and looked through the windshield. Ryan's luxury SUV was already there. The yard was decorated perfectly. Balloons, flowers, and a large banner welcoming everyone to celebrate Daniel Walker. Everyone except him. His wife Megan reached over and gently touched his arm. "You don't have to go inside if this hurts too much." Ethan looked at his family in the car. The people who had never made him feel unwanted. The people who chose him every single day. Then he looked back at the house where he had spent half his life trying to earn a place. "I'm not going there for Ryan," Ethan said quietly. "I'm going there for Dad." He opened the door and stepped out. He had no idea that 5 minutes later, the entire family would learn the truth about the person they had spent years underestimating. The moment Ethan Walker stepped onto his father's front porch, he felt the weight of every memory attached to that house. The faded wooden steps, the old flower pots beside the doorway, and the small crack in the front window were all pieces of a life he once believed he would always be part of. For years, this place had represented home, not because it was perfect, but because he believed the people inside would always matter more than anything else. He reached for the door, but before he could knock, it opened. Ryan Walker stood there wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, holding a glass of sparkling water, looking exactly like the successful son everyone expected him to be. "Ethan," Ryan said, his expression carefully controlled. "I thought I made myself clear." Ethan looked at his brother for a long moment. There was no anger in his face, only disappointment. "I came to see Dad," Ethan replied. Ryan glanced past him toward Megan and the kids waiting near the car. This is exactly what I was talking about. You always make everything complicated. Those words hurt more than Ethan wanted to admit. Not because Ryan said them, but because they sounded familiar. They sounded like every time Ethan had been blamed for caring too much, asking too much, or expecting too much from the people he loved. Before Ethan could respond, his father's voice came from inside the house. Who was at the door? Daniel Walker appeared in the hallway, moving slower than he used to, but still carrying the same warmth in his eyes. The moment he saw Ethan, his expression changed. Ethan. It was only one word, but it carried years of emotions neither of them had spoken about. Ethan smiled. Happy Father's Day, Dad. Daniel stepped forward and hugged his oldest son. For a brief moment, Ethan felt like he was 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen while his father taught him how to fix a broken cabinet hinge. But that feeling disappeared when Ryan cleared his throat. Dad, we should get started. Everyone is already here. Everyone. Ethan noticed the way Ryan said the word. It was not an invitation. It was a reminder. Inside the house, the difference between the two brothers was impossible to ignore. Photos of Ryan's achievements covered the living room walls. Awards, business events, newspaper articles, and framed pictures of Ryan shaking hands with important people filled the space. Ethan looked around and smiled quietly. He was happy his brother had found success. He truly was. But he wondered if anyone had ever wondered what happened to the dreams Ethan had put away. When the family gathered around the dining table, the conversation quickly turned toward Ryan. His new business expansion, his recent accomplishments, his plans for the future. Every story seemed to circle back to be noticed. Then Ryan lifted his glass. I just want to say something about family, he began. Everyone looked toward him. Family is about people who show up and make something of themselves. It is about building a legacy. Ethan looked down at his plate. He understood the message. Ryan was not talking about family. He was talking about worth. After dinner, Daniel quietly asked Ethan to walk with him outside. The two of them stood in the backyard where Ethan had played as a child. Your brother should not have sent that message, Daniel said softly. Ethan looked away. Maybe he is right. Maybe I do not belong here anymore. Daniel immediately shook his head. Do not say that. Ethan looked at his father. Then why does it feel like I have spent my whole life trying to prove I deserve a place? Daniel opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, a car pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out holding a leather folder. She looked around the yard, then walked directly toward Ethan. Mr. Walker? She asked. Everyone turned. Ethan looked confused. Yes. The woman extended her hand. My name is Sarah Collins. I am here because your father asked me to deliver something today. Something he has been waiting years to reveal. The backyard became silent. Ryan's confident expression disappeared for the first time. Ethan looked at his father, wondering what secret could possibly be important enough to interrupt Father's Day. And he had no idea that the truth Daniel was about to share would change how everyone saw him forever. Sarah Collins stood in the Walker family backyard holding the leather folder against her chest, and for a moment nobody moved. The cheerful Father's Day decorations, the carefully prepared dinner, and the laughter from earlier all felt distant now. Everyone was looking at Ethan, wondering why a stranger had arrived with something meant specifically for him. Ethan glanced at his father. Daniel Walker looked nervous, but not afraid. It was the expression of someone who had carried a secret for a long time and finally decided it was time to let it go. Sarah is an attorney, Daniel explained quietly. She has been helping me prepare this. For several months. Ryan immediately stepped forward. Dad, what is this about? His voice was calm, but the confidence he had carried all afternoon was beginning to disappear. Sarah opened the folder carefully. Mr. Daniel Walker asked me to deliver these documents today because he wanted his entire family present when the truth was shared. Ethan felt confused. He had expected another uncomfortable conversation, maybe another reminder that he did not quite fit into the family's picture. He never expected this. Sarah looked at Ethan. Before I explain anything, I need everyone to understand something. Your father has always known exactly what you have done for this family. Ethan looked at Daniel. His father lowered his eyes. I should have told you sooner. Those words reached Ethan differently than he expected. For years, he had wondered if anyone noticed the sacrifices he made. He wondered if anyone remembered the nights he worked extra hours, the bills he quietly handled, and the opportunities he gave up so others could move forward. Ryan crossed his arms. I do not understand why this is becoming such a big moment. Ethan helped the family years ago. That was a long time ago. Sarah turned toward him. Actually, Mr. Ryan Walker, that is exactly why this matters. She opened the folder and removed several documents. Your brother did not simply help the family. He protected it during its most difficult years. The backyard became silent. Sarah continued. When your father's medical expenses became overwhelming, Ethan created a payment plan, worked additional jobs, and made sure the family home remained secure. He did this without asking for recognition. Megan reached for Ethan's hand. She had always known pieces of his story, but even she did not know everything. Ethan looked uncomfortable. He had never wanted applause. He had only wanted the people he loved to remember him. Ryan shook his head. So what? He helped. We all moved on. Daniel finally spoke. No, Ryan. You moved on. Everyone looked at him. Ethan stayed. The words were simple, but they carried years of meaning. Daniel took a slow breath. When you left for college, Ethan stayed home because I needed help. When you started your career, Ethan was working 2 jobs to keep everything stable. When people asked me which son made me proud, I always wanted to say both of you. But I failed to tell Ethan that I was proud of him. Ethan looked away, trying to hide how much those words affected him. He had spent years convincing himself that he did not need recognition. But hearing it from his father felt like something inside him finally became lighter. Sarah placed another document on the table. There is one more thing. Ryan looked at the paper. What is that? Sarah answered calmly. It is related to the Walker Foundation. Ethan froze. He had not expected that name to come up. The foundation was something he created years ago, quietly helping families in need through anonymous donations. Very few people knew he was involved. Ryan stared at him. Wait, you are connected to that foundation? Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked at his father, then at the family standing around him. For the first time in years, he realized the truth was no longer something he had to hide. The person everyone overlooked had been building something meaningful all along. And now, the family that thought they knew Ethan Walker was about to discover they never truly knew him at all. The name Walker Foundation hung in the air like a question nobody expected to ask. Ethan stood quietly beside the backyard table, feeling every pair of eyes turn toward him. For years, he had kept his work private. He never wanted attention. He never wanted people to treat him differently because of what he had built. He only wanted to help people who were facing the same struggles his family once faced. But now, standing in front of the people who had spent years misunderstanding him, the truth was finally coming into the light. Sarah Collins looked at the family and continued. The Walker Foundation has provided financial support to hundreds of families across the country. It has helped with medical expenses, education costs, and emergency assistance. But the person behind it has always chosen to remain anonymous. Ryan stared at Ethan. You are saying he created that? Sarah nodded. Yes. Ethan Walker founded it 8 years ago. The backyard became completely quiet. Ethan could feel the change in the atmosphere. It was not the kind of silence he had known before, the uncomfortable silence where people ignored him. This was different. This was the silence of people realizing they had been wrong. Ryan looked at Ethan with confusion. Why would you hide something like that? Ethan took a moment before answering. Because it was never supposed to be about me. His voice remained calm. People needed help. That was the important part. Daniel looked at his oldest son with emotion in his eyes. That has always been who you are. Ethan looked down. He was not used to hearing those words. For so long, he had accepted being the person in the background. The person who helped others celebrate while nobody noticed his own efforts. But Sarah was not finished. She placed another document on the table. There is also something else everyone should know. Before the foundation became successful, Ethan turned down several opportunities to expand it because he wanted to keep the mission focused on helping ordinary families. Megan smiled softly. She knew that decision sounded exactly like her husband. Ethan never measured success by money or attention. He measured it by the difference he could make in someone's life. Ryan looked uncomfortable for the first time all day. So all those years when everyone thought you were struggling, Ethan looked at him. I was working, just not in the way you expected. That sentence stayed with everyone. Because it was true. Ryan had spent years judging Ethan by what he could see. The older car, the simple clothes, the quiet lifestyle. He never looked deeper. He never asked what Ethan was building behind the scenes. Daniel slowly sat down in his chair. Ethan, I owe you an apology. Ethan immediately looked at him. Dad. Daniel shook his head. No, let me say this. His voice became stronger. I spent too much time celebrating achievements that were easy to see. I forgot to appreciate the things that mattered most. Ethan felt a familiar feeling rise in his chest. Not anger, not resentment, just the sadness of realizing how long it took for the truth to be spoken. Across the yard, Ryan looked at the ground. The confidence he had carried earlier was gone. He had spent years believing success was measured by recognition, status, and appearances. But Ethan had quietly built something far greater without needing anyone to applaud him. Then Sarah checked her phone and looked toward Ethan. There is one more person who asked to speak with you today. Ethan frowned. Who? Before Sarah could answer, a black sedan stopped in front of the house. A man stepped out holding a small envelope. He walked toward the backyard and smiled when he saw Ethan. Mr. Walker, the man said, I'm glad I found you here. Your decision from years ago changed my family's life, and I wanted to thank you personally. Ethan looked around, realizing this day was becoming something he never expected. The family who ignored his sacrifices was finally seeing the person he had always been. But the biggest surprise was still waiting, because Ethan was about to learn that one of his greatest choices from the past would completely change the future of the Walker family. The man standing in front of Ethan Walker was named Michael Bennett, and the moment he introduced himself, Ethan felt a strange sense of familiarity. He had seen that face before, but only in old emails and thank you letters from people the Walker Foundation had helped. Michael held the small envelope carefully in his hands. I know you probably do not remember me, he said, but I will never forget what you did for my family. Ethan looked surprised. I think there may be a misunderstanding. The foundation helped many people. Michael smiled. That is exactly why you are different. You never wanted people to remember your name. He opened the envelope and removed an old photograph. It showed a young family standing outside a small apartment building, smiling despite their difficult circumstances. 8 years ago, my daughter needed expensive medical treatment. We had already given up because we could not afford it. Then we received help from the Walker Foundation. Nobody knew who provided the support. Nobody knew the person behind it. Michael looked directly at Ethan. But today I found out it was you. Ethan studied the photograph quietly. He remembered the family, not their names, but their situation. He remembered reading hundreds of requests, wondering how many people were silently struggling while everyone else continued with their lives. He remembered promising himself that if he ever had the ability to help, he would. You do not have to thank me, Ethan said. I was only doing what I hoped someone would do for my family during our hardest years. Michael shook his head. That is why people respect you. You helped without needing anyone to know. Those words affected Ethan more than he expected, because for years, he had felt invisible. He had wondered if his family saw him as someone who never achieved enough. But standing there, hearing a stranger describe the person he truly was, Ethan finally understood something. Being unnoticed did not mean being unimportant. Behind him, Ryan remained silent. The brother who had spent the afternoon presenting himself as the successful one had nothing to say. For the first time, He was seeing Ethan beyond the simple image he had created in his mind. He was seeing the late nights, the sacrifices, and the quiet determination that had always been there. Daniel watched his two sons carefully. "Ryan," he said softly, "there is something you need to understand." Ryan looked at his father. "What?" Daniel sighed. "Your brother never competed with you. You were the only one keeping score." The sentence hit harder than any argument could have. Ryan looked away, unable to respond. He had always believed Ethan was jealous of his success. He had convinced himself that Ethan's quiet nature meant weakness. But now he realized Ethan had never been trying to beat him. Ethan had simply been living according to his own values. Sarah Collins closed the folder and spoke again. "There is another reason I was asked to come today." Everyone turned toward her. Daniel Walker wanted this conversation to happen because he believes the family needs honesty before it is too late. Ethan looked at his father with concern. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I mean, I have spent too many years allowing misunderstandings to grow." The backyard became quiet again. The decorations around them moved gently in the afternoon breeze, but nobody paid attention to them anymore. This was no longer just a Father's Day gathering. It had become a moment where years of assumptions were finally being challenged. Daniel reached for Ethan's hand. "There is something I should have told you a long time ago. Something about your place in this family. Something that I should never have kept from you." Ethan felt his heart tighten. After all these years of feeling like he was standing outside the family looking in, he was finally about to hear the truth from the one person whose words mattered most. And whatever Daniel was about to reveal would change the way Ethan understood his entire journey. Daniel Walker looked at Ethan for a long moment before finally speaking. The backyard that had once been filled with casual conversations and laughter now felt like a place where years of hidden emotions were finally coming to the surface. Ethan sat quietly, waiting. He had spent most of his life being the person who listened, the person who understood, the person who gave others time to explain themselves. But now, for once, he needed answers. Daniel reached into the folder Sarah had brought and removed a small envelope. It was old, carefully preserved, and slightly worn around the edges. "I kept this because I was afraid I would never find the right time to give it to you," Daniel said. Ethan looked confused. "What is it?" Daniel handed it to him. Inside was a handwritten letter. Ethan recognized his father's handwriting immediately. "I wrote this years ago," Daniel explained. "But every time I wanted to talk to you, I convinced myself there would be a better moment." Ethan slowly opened the letter. The first sentence immediately caught his attention. "My son Ethan, I know you believe nobody noticed what you gave up for this family. But I noticed." Ethan stopped reading for a moment. Those few words alone carried more emotion than he expected. Daniel continued. "When you were younger, I saw how much responsibility you carried. I saw you put your own plans aside, because you wanted to protect the people you loved." Ethan lowered the letter slightly. "Dad, I never wanted you to feel guilty." Daniel shook his head. "This is not about guilt. It is about the truth." He looked toward the house, where old family photographs covered the walls. "I made a mistake. I thought providing for everyone was enough. I thought if I worked hard and kept the family together, everyone would understand what mattered. But I forgot that appreciation needs to be spoken." Ethan looked down at his hands. For years, he had told himself he did not need recognition. He had convinced himself that doing the right thing should be enough. But deep inside, he had always hoped someone would simply say, "I see you." Ryan stood a few feet away, listening silently. The confidence he had shown earlier was gone. He looked at Ethan differently now, not as a brother who had failed to achieve enough, but as someone he had completely misunderstood. Daniel continued. "There is something else you should know. The reason I supported the Walker Foundation was not because I wanted to protect my reputation. I wanted to support the kind of person you became." Ethan looked up. "You supported it?" Daniel smiled. "Of course I did. I just stayed in the background because I knew you never wanted attention." Sarah nodded. "Your father was one of the first people who believed in the Foundation's mission." Ethan looked between them, surprised. He had always believed he built everything alone. But now he realized there had been people quietly supporting him even when he felt forgotten. Megan squeezed his shoulder gently. You always told me you did not need anyone to understand. But I think part of you always hoped they would. Ethan gave a small smile. Maybe. The honesty of that answer surprised even him. Ryan finally stepped forward. Ethan. Everyone looked at him. Ryan took a breath. I do not know what to say. Ethan studied his brother's face. For the first time, Ryan did not look defensive. He looked uncertain. I spent years thinking you were disappointed in me, Ryan admitted. I thought you looked down on the choices I made. Ethan shook his head. Ryan, I was never against you. Ryan looked away. Then why did it feel like you were always judging me? Ethan paused before answering. Because I was hurt that you never asked about my life. The honesty of those words created a silence that felt different from before. Not uncomfortable. Not cold. Just real. Daniel looked at both of his sons. This family spent too much time comparing instead of understanding. The afternoon sun began moving lower over the neighborhood, casting a warm glow across the backyard. For the first time in years, Ethan was not standing outside the family circle. He was finally standing in the middle of it. But as the conversation continued, Sarah received another message on her phone. She looked at it carefully, then turned toward Ethan. There is one final matter your father wanted addressed today. Ethan looked surprised. Final matter? Sarah nodded. Something that will decide the future of the Walker family. Sarah Collins looked down at her phone for a moment before putting it away. The expression on her face told Ethan that whatever came next was important. The backyard had become completely different from the place where the day had started. A few hours earlier, Ethan had arrived expecting another painful reminder that he did not belong. Now he was surrounded by people finally seeing the truth he had carried quietly for years. Your father wanted this conversation to happen today because he believes a family is built on more than memories, Sarah said. It is built on choices. And one choice he made years ago will affect everyone here. Ryan looked uncertain. What choice? Sarah opened the folder again and removed a set of documents. Daniel Walker created a family trust. The purpose of this trust was not about money. It was about protecting the values this family was supposed to represent. Ethan looked at his father. Dad, why did you never tell me about this? Daniel smiled sadly. Because I knew you would never accept anything if you thought it was a reward. That answer sounded exactly like the father Ethan remembered. Daniel had always understood him better than he realized. Sarah continued explaining. Your father wanted the trust to support causes that matter to the family. Education, community programs, and assistance for people who needed a second chance. He wanted the next generation of Walkers to understand that success is not only measured by what you own. Everyone listened carefully, but Ethan noticed Ryan becoming more uncomfortable. For years, Ryan had built his identity around being the successful brother, the one who had achieved the things people could easily see. The expensive house, the impressive career, the public recognition. But now he was learning that Ethan had created something meaningful without any desire to be praised. I do not understand, Ryan finally said. Why keep all of this secret? Why let everyone think you were struggling? Ethan looked at him. Because I never needed people to think I was important. I needed the people I loved to be okay. Ryan lowered his eyes. That answer seemed to affect him more than any accusation could have. There was no anger in Ethan's voice. No attempt to make Ryan feel small. Only honesty. Daniel looked at both sons. That is the difference between you two. Ethan never asked what he would get in return. Ryan took a slow breath. You really believe that? Daniel nodded. I know that. The words stayed with everyone. Ryan had spent years assuming Ethan was quietly judging him. But now he realized Ethan had been carrying a completely different burden. He was not competing. He was surviving, helping, and building a life based on responsibility. Megan smiled softly as she watched the brothers. She knew this moment was difficult, but she also knew it was necessary. Some misunderstandings could only disappear when people finally stopped pretending everything was fine. Sarah placed the final document on the table. There is one more condition your father included in the trust. Ethan looked curious. What condition? Sarah answered. The trust would only continue if the family agreed to work together instead of against each other. Ryan looked surprised. So this was never about choosing one son over the other? Daniel shook his head. No. It was about reminding both of my sons what family means. Ethan felt something change inside him. For so long, he had believed he needed to prove his value. But maybe the real lesson was that his value had always existed, even when others failed to recognize it. Then Sarah looked toward Ryan. There is still something you need to address. Ryan knew exactly what she meant. He looked at Ethan, then at their father. The brother who had once spoken with complete confidence now struggled to find the right words. Finally, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Ethan remained silent. Ryan continued, not just for today. For years of assuming I knew who you were without ever asking. The backyard became quiet again. But this time, the silence was not filled with rejection. It was filled with the possibility of healing. And for the first time in a very long time, the Walker family had a chance to start over. Ryan Walker stood quietly in the backyard, and for the first time in years, Ethan saw something he never expected to see in his younger brother's expression. Not confidence, not pride, not the need to prove something, just regret. The afternoon sun continued to shine over the Walker family home, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The tension that had filled the house earlier was slowly being replaced by something much harder to find. Understanding. Ryan looked at Ethan and took a deep breath. I do not know if an apology can fix everything, he said, because I realize now that I spent years creating a version of you in my head instead of actually knowing you. Ethan listened without interrupting. For most of his life, he had hoped Ryan would understand him. But now that moment had arrived. He realized understanding was not about hearing the perfect words. It was about seeing whether someone truly meant them. Ryan continued, I thought you were unhappy with my success. I thought every time you were quiet, you were judging me. But the truth is, you were probably just tired of being the person everyone expected to carry everything. Ethan looked at his brother. Those words were closer to the truth than Ryan probably realized. I never wanted you to fail, Ethan said. I wanted you to remember that success does not mean forgetting the people who helped you get there. Ryan nodded slowly. I know that now. Daniel watched his sons carefully. He had spent years hoping they would find their way back to each other. Not because they were brothers by blood, but because they had once been two children who looked out for each other before life became complicated. Megan smiled as she watched Ethan. She knew how much this moment meant to him. She knew how many times he had wondered if his family would ever recognize the person he had always been. Sarah Collins gathered the documents and placed them back into the folder. There is one final thing your father wanted everyone to understand. Ethan looked at her. What else could there be? Sarah smiled gently. The trust was never designed to reward one person. It was designed to preserve a family legacy. But your father added a personal message that he wanted read today. She handed Daniel a small envelope. Daniel opened it and removed a handwritten note. His hands moved slowly as he unfolded the paper. I wrote this because sometimes people say things better on paper than they do in person, he said. Then he began reading. To my sons, I hope you understand that a family is not built by the person who receives the most attention. It is built by the people who continue showing up when nobody is watching. Ethan felt his eyes become heavy with emotion. Those words described his entire life. The moments when he helped without recognition. The choices he made without expecting anything in return. The times he stayed, even when leaving would have been easier. Daniel continued reading. Ryan, I hope you learn that achievements mean more when they are shared with the people who supported you. Ethan, I hope you learn that you do not have to carry everything alone. Ethan looked at his father. That sentence reached deeper than he expected. Because the truth was, he had become so used to being the strong one that he forgot he was allowed to need support too. After the letter was finished, nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Ryan stepped forward and gave Ethan a sincere hug. It was not a dramatic moment. It was simple, real, the kind of moment Ethan had secretly hoped for years ago but stopped expecting. "I should have been there for you," Ryan said quietly. Ethan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Then be there now." Those 4 words carried more meaning than any argument they had ever had. The past could not be changed. The missed moments could not be recovered. But the future was still theirs to create. As the family returned inside for the rest of the Father's Day celebration, Ethan looked around the room differently. The same walls, the same furniture, the same photographs. But something had changed. For the first time, he was not wondering whether he belonged. He knew he did. And while the family had finally discovered the truth about Ethan Walker, Ethan discovered something equally important. Sometimes the greatest reward is not being recognized by everyone. It is finally realizing you never needed permission to know your own worth. 1 year later, the Walker family home looked almost exactly the same from the outside. The old wooden steps were still there. The flower pots beside the entrance were still carefully arranged. The small crack in the front window had finally been repaired, but Ethan Walker always thought the house was never really about the walls or the furniture. It was about the people inside. And after everything that happened on that Father's Day, the people inside had changed. Not because the past disappeared. It did not. The years of misunderstanding, the moments of silence, and the words that caused pain were still part of their story. But they were no longer the only parts. Ethan stood in the backyard watching his children play with their grandfather. Daniel Walker laughed as his granddaughter showed him a drawing she had made. It was a simple picture of the family sitting together under the sun. This time, Ethan noticed something different. The picture included everyone. Nobody was left out. Ryan walked across the yard carrying a tray of drinks. A year earlier, Ethan never would have imagined seeing his brother like this. Ryan had changed in small ways, not through grand promises, but through consistent actions. He called more often. He asked questions. He listened. Most importantly, he stopped assuming he already knew everything about the people around him. "You know," Ryan said as he handed Ethan a drink, "I used to think people respected me because of what I achieved." Ethan looked at him. "And now?" Ryan smiled slightly. "Now I think people respect you because of who you are when nobody is watching." Ethan looked across the yard. He saw Megan talking with Daniel. He saw his children laughing. He saw a family that was not perfect, but one that was finally honest. "That took you a long time to figure out," Ethan joked. Ryan laughed. "I know." Their conversation was interrupted when Daniel called them over for a family photo. For years, Ethan had avoided pictures like that. He always felt like he was standing at the edge of someone else's life. But this time, when everyone gathered together, he stood exactly where he belonged. In the center. Not because he had finally proven himself. Not because someone had finally approved of him. But because he had always been part of the family. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Ethan sat on the porch with his father. The neighborhood was quiet, and the warm summer air carried the familiar sounds of families enjoying their evening. Daniel looked at his son. "Do you remember when you were young and you told me you wanted to build something that helped people?" Ethan smiled. "I forgot I said that." Daniel shook his head. "I did not." Ethan looked toward the street. For so long, he had believed his greatest achievement was the foundation he created. But now he understood something deeper. The foundation was never just about helping strangers. It was about becoming the kind of person he wished he had seen during difficult moments. Someone who showed kindness without expecting recognition. Someone who stayed when others walked away. "Dad," Ethan said quietly, "I spent a lot of years wondering if people saw me." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "And now?" Ethan smiled. "Now I know I saw myself." Daniel smiled proudly. That was the answer he had hoped his son would find. Because confidence built from other people's approval could disappear at any moment. But knowing your own value was something nobody could take away. Months later, the Walker Foundation opened a new community center in their hometown. Ethan stood in front of a crowd of families, volunteers, and local leaders. He looked at the people gathered there and remembered the young man he used to be. The person who wondered if his efforts mattered. The person who quietly helped while believing nobody noticed. Now he understood that kindness was never invisible. Sometimes it simply takes time for people to recognize it. And as Ethan looked at his family standing together in the crowd, he realized the greatest chapter of his life was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally accepting that he had always been enough.